Hi, Studio Recapped here. Today, we're going to talk about a movie called Survive in the Sci-Fi and Adventure genres. Spoiler alert is on. Watch out and take care. You won't believe how much your support means. Thank you so much for your support. The movie begins with a family planning a trip on a cruise ship to the Caribbean to celebrate their son Ben's birthday. At the start of the trip, everything seems fine. While Lynn and his father Tom are fishing, the mother, Julia, jumps into the water for a swim. Even though the sea is calm, she suddenly feels something pulling her down. Tom, who is busy fishing, notices that a compass needle is moving strangely, but he ignores it. Meanwhile, Julia starts drowning and screams for help, but no one hears her. It's as if some invisible force is dragging her away from the boat, and the water begins shifting unnaturally. Suddenly, Tom hears his wife screams. He quickly moves the boat and jumps into the water to save her. After pulling her back on board, he angrily warns everyone that whoever goes for a swim should always inform the others first. They try to calm themselves down and start celebrating Ben's 13th birthday. Tom brings out the cake, and Ben opens his presents. Meanwhile, their daughter, Casey, takes a family picture with her camera. Just then, her boyfriend calls. Casey answers and sees a dangerous storm hitting the city. But before she can react, the call gets disconnected. Suddenly, the ship starts shaking. The family is still trying to regain their balance when they notice several whales and sharks surrounding them. Tom explains that sometimes these sea creatures lose their way during storms. The hits from the creatures against the boat become more violent. To check the damage, Tom dives into the water but gets injured by a shark. Julia stitches up his wounds. The situation becomes even more tense when Tom informs them that the yacht's rudders are bent due to the impact, meaning they can't move forward, they're completely stranded. Casey tries to contact her boyfriend again but fails due to a lack of signal. They have no choice to call for help, but their radio isn't receiving any signals. To make things worse, they only have 4 days worth of water left. Despite the dire situation, Tom reassures everyone that they're in a shipping route, so someone will eventually spot them. Suddenly, strange noises come from outside the boat. The family rushes to the deck and is shocked to see fiery meteors falling from the sky. In a desperate move, Tom starts the engine and barely manages to steer the boat away from the impact. However, the engine gets severely damaged in the process. Upon closer inspection, they realize those weren't meteors. They were artificial satellites crashing down from space. The terrified family hides inside the yacht as it shakes violently. They all put on life jackets. Casey starts feeling nauseous and throws up, while Julia gets a sudden nosebleed. Meanwhile, Tom grabs a flare gun and fires it into the sky, hoping someone will see their distress signal. Somehow, they survive the night. The next morning, when they step onto the deck, they're in complete disbelief. The water has disappeared, and the boat is now sitting on a rocky surface that had been underwater just the night before. Everything has shifted. The compass indicates that Earth's poles have reversed, causing the land and water to swap places. This was an extremely rare phenomenon that had only happened once before in recorded history. The shocking truth sinks in human civilization has been wiped out. Casey is devastated and worried about her boyfriend. Crying, she locks herself inside the cabin. Julia tries to comfort her, but Casey just wants to be alone. Meanwhile, Ben inflates the remaining balloons on the boat, hoping that someone might spot them. Tom, determined to find a way out, starts working on the radio. He tries different signals and is stunned when he finally hears a man's voice, Captain NATO. NATO is the commander of a small submarine. When the disaster struck, he and his team were deep underwater. He managed to survive, but all communication systems had failed, and he had lost his crew. Now, he was waiting for help. Based on his calculations, the ocean would return in about a week. NATO advises them to find the highest land possible and stay there. Tom begs him to take his 2 kids, but NATO replies that he only has room for 1 person. Eventually, after Julia and Tom plead with him, NATO agrees and gives them coordinates of his location. It's 2 days away, so they must leave as soon as possible. That night, the family rests to prepare for the journey. The next morning, as Tom steps onto the deck, he spots a man approaching with a dog. He rushes toward him and sees that the man is injured. Tom offers him some water. The man takes a sip of water and suddenly pushes Tom in the face. Julia, witnessing the scene, rushes toward them. The man then pulls out a sharp object and brutally stabs Tom in the chest and throat, killing him right in front of his wife's eyes. Julia screams in horror, tears stream down her face, but she quickly realizes there's no way to save her husband. There isn't even time to grieve, she has to protect the kids. She hurries back to the boat, but just as she's escaping, the killer throws a sharp object at her, injuring her arm. The children, startled by their mother's cries, gather around her. Julia quickly locks all the doors and hides her son and daughter inside a storage cabinet on the boat. She hands her daughter a flare gun and tells her to use it if necessary. Then she hides in the ship's bathroom, gripping a knife in her hand. Meanwhile, the killer reaches the boat, breaks down the doors, and steps inside. Julia, hiding in the back bathroom, tends to her wound while the killer, seemingly starving, rummages through the kitchen and ravenously eats from an open can of food. The man starts searching the yacht while Julia silently sneaks out and hides underneath it. We see the killer standing right above her, but he doesn't notice. Unfortunately, his dog as it starts barking aggressively. Julia has no choice but to fight the dog, ultimately killing it. The killer hears the commotion, rushes outside, and finds his dog's lifeless body. Furious, he storms back in only to find Julia. He attacks her, beating her mercilessly and even attempting to strangle her. The children witness the horrifying scene. Casey, with no other option, opens the storage cabinet and fires the flare gun at the man. The blast doesn't kill him, but it throws him back. However, the flames quickly spread, setting the boat on fire. The killer attempts to attack again, but Julia kicks him back and jumps off the yacht. Meanwhile, Ben reaches his father's lifeless body and breaks down crying. The whole family gathers around Tom's corpse, unable to process their grief. But their mourning is cut short when they see the killer emerging from the flames. There's no time to cry, they have to run. Family takes off, with the killer chasing after them. Moments later, the yacht explodes behind them. After running a long distance, they take refuge in a canyon in the Estonian desert. They barely have any water left, but Ben refuses to drink. The poor boy is consumed by guilt, thinking the killer may have come after them because of his balloons. Casey has the same thought, but Julia reassures Ben that it's not his fault and he shouldn't blame himself. Meanwhile, the killer is still hunting them. The family runs desperately through the desert until they reach an abandoned farm surrounded by barrels of toxic waste, which used to be filled with water. They have no drinking water left, all because Casey didn't properly close the canteen. Feeling hopeless, Casey believes they won't make it, but Julia refuses to give up. 10. They stumble upon the wreckage of a plane that had crashed into the sea years ago. Exhausted, they take shelter inside. Julia stares at their last family photo and tells her kids the story of how she met Tom at hospital. Family mourns their loss together and eventually drifts off to sleep. Later that night, Casey wakes up to a noise and steps outside. Unbeknownst to her, the killer is creeping up behind her. But before he can strike, Julia suddenly lunges at him with a knife, avenging her husband by taking the killer's life. Hours later, the family prepares to continue their journey. As they pass by the killer's body, they see that it's been torn apart by creatures that seem even more terrifying than humans. This means they're still in danger. Desperate for water, Ben runs toward a saltwater pit and starts drinking, but his mother and sister immediately stop him. Unfortunately, he already swallowed some of it, causing him to fall ill. They use plastic chairs to build a temporary shelter and rest for a while. Suddenly, Julia hears strange noises outside. Alarmed, she wakes the kids, and they realize they're facing a new danger. They start running again. Along the way, they spot a group of people near some shipping containers. Julia desperately calls out for help, but the people ignore her and her children. Then, they all freeze in horror. Giant crabs are approaching. Julia and her kids climb onto a container, but as she does, one of the crabs viciously injures her leg. The crabs break through a gap at the bottom of the container and attack the people inside, slaughtering them all. The survivors try to fight back with guns, but there are just too many crabs. Julia and her kids watch in terror as the massacre unfolds. She tries to tend to her wound, but eventually passes out. When she wakes up, she realizes she's alone and panics. Calling for her children, she steps outside to find the area eerily quiet. The crabs are gone, and the kids have wandered off to explore. Julia uses fire to cauterize her wound. Meanwhile, Ben loads the weapons they found. The kids discover some stored water, quenching their thirst. Julia then finds a radio and manages to contact NATO. They inform her that deep-sea arthropods had attacked the area due to excessive free oxygen in the atmosphere, making the creatures more aggressive. But the most critical news is that the ocean is returning soon, meaning Julia has very little time left. Desperate to save her children, Julia begs NATO for help. Unfortunately, she has lost a map and doesn't know her exact location. NATO signals her with flare, helping him spot a yellow submarine. However, getting to it won't be easy. Casey realizes her mother may be left behind since the submarine has limited space. The only way to reach it is by crossing a valley contaminated with toxic waste. As they move forward, Julia gets stuck between some rocks and urges the kids to keep going without her. The kids refuse at first, but eventually they have no choice. When they reach the submarine, they find it abandoned until they stumble upon the severely injured Captain Neo. He tells them he won't survive. Meanwhile, Julia, who is once again under attack by giant crabs, tries to fight them off with her gun. But she runs out of bullets, and thousands of crabs keep swarming toward her. She's on the verge of giving up. Just then, Casey climbs up the rocks and reaches out for her mother. They rush toward the submarine and manage to get inside just as the crabs ferociously surround it. Suddenly, a massive ocean wave crashes in, lifting the submarine and carrying it away. As Julia regains consciousness, She finds the vessel drifting toward a ruined city, brought there by the power of the sea.